Hey, are you familiar with this quote? I would be quite satisfied if my novels, especially the ones I set in the past, did no more than teach my readers that their past, with all its imperfections, was not one long night of savagery from which the first Europeans acting on God's behalf delivered them. Hi everyone, I'm Noe and this is Afrific Ref Space. In this space, we travel to different parts of Africa, learning about their traditions and cultures through novel reviews. And today we'll be reviewing the most popular African novel, and that is Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. Things Fall Apart was first published in 1958. It is widely read and reviewed, and it captures a historical moment in the lives of the Igbos in Nigeria during the time that the British colonial administration penetrated Nigeria to colonize it. It looks at the impact of the collision of these two worlds and the lives of the Igbos. And then the quotation I gave earlier was from Achebe's essay, The Novelist as Teacher, where he talked about his motivation for writing Things Fall Apart. According to him, some European authors distorted the image of Africans in their texts. For instance, in Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness and Joyce Carey's Mr. Johnson. And Achebe thinks that it is the responsibility of Africans to rewrite the distorted image. And so Things Fall Apart is like a protest novel or a reply to Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness and Joyce Carey's Mr. Johnson. And so in today's review, we'll be considering three questions. The first question is, how does Achebe build the structure of Things Fall Apart, and what are the implications of that kind of structure? The second question is, why does the protagonist Okonkwo fail? And then the third one is, how does Achebe present the notion of the illusion of control in Things Fall Apart? So we take the first question, which is, how does Achebe build the structure of Things Fall Apart? Now, the structure of Things Fall Apart is built in a binary opposition way. So what you have first is going to be in contradistinction with what is going to follow it. For instance, in chapter 1, Okonkwo is first introduced to us. He's introduced as a high achiever. He has 3 wives. He's a hardworking farmer. He beats Sam Alinze the cat. He's one of the lords of the land. He's the one that they send on a diplomatic mission to Mbino when a woman from Umuofia is killed. And then after that introduction, the next person that we see is Okonkwo's father, Unoka, who is the exact opposite of Okonkwo. In fact, the narrator calls him a lazy man. And then we see an example of his irresponsibility when one of the days, his creditor comes to the house to tell him to pay him his money. And then Unoka looks at his creditor and then tells him to look at the wall in his house or in his obi. And then he says, look at the strokes on the wall. He actually has strokes, long strokes and short strokes. So the long strokes actually represent huge amounts that he owes to creditors. And then the short strokes are for small amount that he owes to creditors. And then this particular creditor, his own stroke is a short one. And then Noka tells the man, the sun will first shine on people who are standing up before it gets to people who are kneeling under them. What a way to talk to somebody's creditor. So if you look at it, he's an ungrateful man and he's irresponsible. And that is how he tells the man, please go to your house. When I have money, I will come and pay you. So when we look at this, we understand why Okonkwo does not want to be like his father. So apart from this, we have more examples of this kind of back and forth between the comic and the evil, or maybe the happy and the sad. So Ikemefuna is shown to us to be doing well in Okonkwo's house, and then after that, Okonkwo beats his wife Ojugo during the week of peace, and he disrupts that peace. And then the next time we see the celebration of the New Yam Festival, where they invite their in-laws from different parts of the community and the neighboring towns, and these people come to celebrate with them. And then immediately after that, Ogbuefi Ezeudu comes to Okonkwo's house to tell him that Umuofia wants to sacrifice Ikemefuna, but he tells him, please, do not have a hand in the boy's death because he calls you father. But regardless, Okonkwo still cuts down Ikemefuna when it's time to sacrifice him. Then the third one is Obierika's daughter. She gets married, and then everybody in the community is happy. There is this festive mood, and then after that, Ogbuefi Ezudu dies, the oldest man in Umuofia. He dies. And on the day they go to bury him, as all the men are trying to like bid him the final farewell, Okonkwo's gun inadvertently kills the son of this man that is being buried. And so he has to go on exile, and his compound is burnt, and everything in his compound is destroyed. And then we also have another one, like the year Okonkwo borrows CDM to expand his farm. So he actually goes to Nwakibe's house, and in that place we see how Nwakibe and the other people there, they praise Okonkwo and say, yeah, your father did not leave anything for you, but you're a very hardworking man. I am not going to hesitate to help you. And then the next thing, the narrator tells us, the year that Okonkwo took 800 CDMs from Nwakibe was the worst year in living memory. Nothing happened in its proper time. It was either too early or too late. And so Okonkwo actually, like hardworking farmers do, they begin to plant with the first rain. And so he plants some of his CDMs with the first rain. After that, the rain ceases, doesn't come again. And then the heat of the sun roasts the CDMs inside the earth. And then after that, when the rain begins to come and they plant again, it rains cats and dogs. And so the earth is cold. So the normal conditions for plants to do well, that particular year does not have it. So they don't have any bumper harvest, So if we look at this world, we see that you have a blend of what is happy and what is sad. So you cannot really have a long stretch of the happy or a long stretch of that which is sad. So this is a way that this world, the balance is created. So you have, sometimes you are happy, sometimes the sad ones or sad things will happen. Then the second question is, why does Okonkwo fail? Okonkwo fails because of fear and insecurity. The narrator tells us about this fear that grips Okonkwo in chapter 2, and I read, perhaps down in his heart, Okonkwo was not a cruel man, but his whole life was dominated by fear, the fear of failure and of weakness. It was deeper and more intimate than the fear of evil and capricious gods and magic. Okonkwo's fears was greater than this. It was not external, but lay deep within him. It was the fear of himself, lest he be found to resemble his father. Even as a little boy, he had resented his father's failure and weakness. And so Okonkwo was ruled by one passion to hate everything that his father Onoko had loved. One of those things was gentleness. So if we look at this excerpt, we now understand why Okonkwo is the way he is. Achebe shows us how the environment actually shapes somebody's character and identity. And the environment in question here is the behavior or the identity of Okonkwo's father and Okonkwo's father's house. It's not about the maybe collective consciousness or socialization process of the Umuofians, but actually what Okonkwo gets from his father's house. And so because he does not want to resemble his father in any way, and his father loves things that are gentle, Okonkwo hates things that are gentle. And so if you look at it, he's not able to balance his masculine energy with his feminine energy. And this is where Okonkwo's problem begins. And so he grows up like this, being a man who eventually grows to become a toxic masculine man. He thinks that anything that is soft is not good for a man. A man has to show brute force and power, even if it's superficial. And so because of this behavior, Okonkwo persistently transgresses against individuals, against the community, against the gods. So if he's not being rebuked, he's being told to go and appease one deity or the other. And so some critics who actually present Okonkwo as the representative of the values of Umuofia, they actually get it wrong. Because there are other men in this community like Ogbuefi Ezudu, like Obierika, and all the other men. If you encounter those ones, you see, the way they act, that there is some kind of balance in the way they read the world. But Okonkwo is actually different. So he cannot be a representative of the values of the Umuofians. And then we have Wando Achebe, who also talks about the worldview of the Igbos in her article entitled Balancing male and female principles, teaching about gender in Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. She actually uses a proverb to try to capture this worldview, and I quote, "Where one thing stands, something else will stand beside it." She goes further to explain the Igbo world, therefore, is a world of duality, so that while they admire courage and strength and success, the Igbo are fast to caution us that the coward outlives the warrior. So if you look at it, these are people who believe in balancing things. You have to be tactful, you have to be diplomatic. When it's time for you to be angry and scream and shout, you do that. Then when it's time for you to be accommodating and tolerate things, you also do that. But we see a man who is obsessed with, showing power all the time, and so that is why he actually fails. And then the third question is, what does Achebe say about illusion of control? Now, the notion of the illusion of control is this idea that humans can actually control their future. They can control the outcome of their lives by being intentional in the way they behave. For instance, if somebody has an exam to write, they would say, "Oh, I have to prepare very well. If I prepare very well, I'm going to succeed in this exam." Yes, you have to prepare very well, but then there are other things too. And so we also have some Christians who think in this way, like, if I go to church, if I do charitable works, if I help people, treat my neighbor as myself, love God, serve God, then my life will be a beauty to behold. But in Things Fall Apart, Achebe, creates this world to suggest that life is not really like that. And so there are a lot of examples that he uses. For example, in the year that Okonkwo borrows seed yams, Okonkwo plants with the first rain, and of course, in farming, farmers prefer to use the first rain to plant, and that is also how people who are hardworking in their farming work. And so Okonkwo does this. But after doing that, after that first rain, it does not rain again. The heat of the sun is too much. The seed yams are roasted in the earth, and so he loses that first set that he plants. Of course, it will lead to some kind of setback. And then after that, when the rain begins to fall, it rains cats and dogs, and it's floody. Some of the seed yams are even washed away, and then the earth is very cold, so the plant do not have the normal weather condition to help the yams to have a bumper harvest. So that is how, even though these people are intentional, they plan very well, but the outcome is not actually what they expect. So life is not really linear the way they begin to think about it. So if you look at this illusion of control, is like reading the world in a mathematical way, like 1 + 1 must give you 2. But then Achebe shows it's not like that. Then a second example is when they go to salute Ogbuefi Ezudu. Okonkwo, like the other men, he actually wants to bid the man the final farewell. And then he does the same thing that every other person does, and then his own gun inadvertently kills the man's son. So he has to go on exile because that is regarded as female archery. He goes on exile, his compound is burnt down, and then, he leaves. Then the third example is while in his mother's place in Mbanta, his daughters actually come of age, they are ripe for marriage, and then they begin to get suitors. People are asking for their hands in marriage, and then their father says, "Please, don't accept anybody from Mbanta. Wait till we get back to Umuofia." And his plan is, since I have beautiful daughters, when I go back with them, it's going to add to the glory of the return of the hero, So he's always planning and strategizing. But then, while in Mbanta, the missionaries are in Umuofia, and then the Umuofia that Okonkwo lives is not the Umuofia that he returns to. Because while he's in Mbanta, the missionaries are there, the colonial administration is there, and then there is this worldview that is introduced into Umuofia. So they begin to take the values of the white man, the values from Christian religion, and so they are no longer having the same values they used to have before, because they are blending these two worlds and moving on with it. And so when Okonkwo comes back, people don't even notice that the hero has returned, And so his plan that his return is going to be glorious and all of that does not actually work out in that way. So you see, he's a good strategist, he strategizes, but his plans do not actually work out that way. So that's the illusion of control, you know. And then the year that they actually experienced that terrible weather condition that actually does not help their plans to do well, Okonkwo tells himself that because he recuperates from that he's going to be able to overcome whatever it is he faces. But then he's making his judgment based on the things he has already experienced. He does not think that maybe in the future there could be situations where he will not have the capacity to like overcome the challenges. And so when the colonial administration enters Umuofia, he returns and he's feeling like, no, I'm not going to be, under any white man. He sees himself and he prepares himself to be a leader of the land. And I don't think he has any other plan for himself apart from being one of the lords of the land. So he tries to regain his position. He tells himself, if Umuofia is not going to fight, I'm going to fight alone. And then he kills the messenger of the white man, and then he sees that Umuofia is not willing to fight, so he goes and he kills himself. So that is about the illusion of control. If we also come to the biblical tradition, in Romans 9:16, the Bible says, it's not of him that willeth, it's not of him that runneth, but it's of God that showeth mercy. So what this place is saying is that even when human beings do their best, do what they are supposed to do, that there are still other factors in the universe that will determine whether success or failure will come to a man, So that's how the illusion of control thing is working out. Even when things fall apart, we have a place where at a meeting, Okonkwo refers to a fellow man as a woman. He just dismisses him casually because the man has no title. And then one of the elders there, they tell him, see, people that benevolent gods have cracked their palm kernels should learn to be humble. So if you look at that, you see that these people believe, okay, he's successful, we know he's hardworking, he does this, he has physical strength. But then it's not only about the totality of what a man can do for himself. There are other factors too that come in. So that's how Achebe presents the illusion of control. And so in conclusion, I have two questions, that will help you to also think further about this text. The first one is, at what point does Okonkwo's failure become an individual failure? Some critics say that Okonkwo's death marks the death of Umuofia. And my argument is that really true? Is Okonkwo's failure an individual failure or the failure of the whole of Umuofia? Then the second question is, what does it mean for a community to die? And does Umuofia really die or morph into some form of hybrid community? These are my thoughts. Just think about this. If you've read the novel, you can also ruminate on this. And then if you like this content, if you like what is happening here, then subscribe to the channel so that anytime we publish a video, you will know, firsthand that a video has been released. So thank you for watching, and let me get your comments about this review. Yeah, till next time.